This week in Louisiana agriculture.
The latest round of LSU Ag Center budget cuts could endanger the future of one degree program at LSU. I'm Kristen Oakes, and I'll have that story coming up.
How sweet it is the LSU Ag Center secures $17 million for biofuels research. I'm Avery Davidson with that story ahead.
I'm AJ Zabid in Pointe-Coupee Parish, and I'll show you why one sugar grower here is fired up about this year's harvest.
Hello everyone, I'm Michael Dana. Thanks so much for joining us. A $5 million budget deficit has forced the LSU Ag Center to cut even more jobs. The latest round of cuts hits close to home for ag majors at the LSU campus. The Ag Center announced it is shutting down its goat, sheep, and swine units at the Ben-Hur Research Farm here in Baton Rouge. Last week, ag students met with university officials to express their opposition to the closures and to discuss the future of the university's animal science programs. The meeting also prompted the Ag Center to consider other options to keep the swine unit running. This week in Louisiana Agriculture's Kristen Oakes now shows us why some of these ag students are fighting so hard for the farm and for their education.
Most people think pigs are loud, filthy, smelly animals, but Rebecca Lorette loves everything about them.
If you don't have the heart and the passion, if you can't wake up every day and do what we do to raise hogs, you don't need to be doing it.
For the past 10 years, Lorette put her passion into the swine unit here at the LSU Ag Center's Ben-Hur Research Farm, but not for very much longer. Budget shortfalls are forcing the LSU Ag Center to shut down the LSU Swine Farm.
I knew that with the economy and the budget cuts that we were definitely in jeopardy. I just hope that they can see also the value in the research that was done here and the education that we provided for the next generation.
Lainey Black is part of that generation fighting to keep the swine farm alive. A native of Houston, Texas, she says the strength and diversity of the animal science program were the only reasons she chose to attend LSU.
I was looking for a college where I could have the experience, the agricultural experience, because it is the industry that I want to get into. If I would have known beforehand, like if I was an incoming freshman for next year for the 2013, I would not have chosen LSU.
The closure would also terminate 4 classes required for the animal science curriculum.
When you start changing an animal science program to move away from food animal production, we're in a dangerous spot.
With more than 400 students, the School of Animal Sciences makes up the majority of LSU's College of Agriculture. The fear of losing those students prompted college administrators to consider taking over the swine unit.
If we lose the swine unit, that's going to definitely change the whole direction that our program takes. Right now we're looking at how we can develop a business plan that will allow us to maintain that program, keep it viable from an economic perspective, but also keep those resources available for our students and for our teaching program.
The swine unit at the LSU Ag Center's research farm teaches hundreds of college students, but they also take these young pigs and touch the lives of thousands of young elementary students.
Thank you, Miss Rebecca, for bringing your pigs to St. Luke.
Lorette and her PR pig, Bentley, began a community outreach program to educate urban children about where their food comes from.
You know, if we can have one child defend agriculture, if we can have one child who grows up and is in a conversation that starts to demoralize or injure the perspective of agriculture, and that child can say, hey, look, that's not true. We had a lady come and brought all kinds of pigs, and I know how those pigs are raised. I learned that in school. We're on the right track.
With the future of the farm unknown, Lorette says she hopes her students will continue to fight for the future of agriculture. In Baton Rouge, I'm Kristen Oakes for This Week in Louisiana Agriculture.
LSU Ag Center Vice Chancellor Dr. Paul Carell said he expected students to be upset over the cuts. He said the Ag Center has exhausted its financial flexibility, and to bring its budget into balance, the Ag Center has no choice but to cut people and cut programs. It's not all bad news at the Ag Center regarding its finances. The USDA awarded the LSU Ag Center a grant of $17 million over the next 5 years, but there's a catch. Researchers can only use the money to create business opportunities for biofuels. This week in Louisiana Agriculture's Avery Davidson tells us why this could be a sweet deal for Louisiana farmers and Louisiana consumers hard hit at the gas pump.
Sugarcane is Louisiana's #1 row crop when it comes to making money. It could also be the state's leading energy source. That's the hope of researchers at the LSU Ag Center. They recently secured a $17 million grant from the USDA to speed up the process for developing biofuels and biochemicals from 2 crops, sugarcane and sweet sorghum.
We should be among the very leaders.
LSU Ag Center Vice Chancellor John Russin told the Baton Rouge Press Club about the grant. He and Audubon Sugar Institute researcher Vadim Kochergin, along with 7 business partners, must now develop a plan over the next 5 years that would guarantee farmers make money growing crops for energy.
We need to make sure we create the right business cases, economic scenarios, if you wish, that will allow people to evaluate the real economics, not the one that somebody made up. But I think Louisiana has tremendous potential.
This grant comes at a time when the LSU Ag Center is closing research stations and laying off employees. Vice Chancellor Paul Carell says money, or the lack thereof, does not change the mission.
Yes, budgets are tight, but we can't stop developing and discovering ways of looking at crops being more valuable and value-added processing potential. And energy independence for the United States, what's more important than that?
Important for the LSU Ag Center and Louisiana farmers. In Baton Rouge, I'm Avery Davidson for This Week in Louisiana Agriculture.
Now that grant is part of $136 million in USDA grants that were awarded to 5 universities across the country. The USDA says it hopes the research generated by these grants will create rural jobs and less dependence on imports of foreign oil. Well, sugarcane haulers are back on Louisiana's highways as the 2011 sugarcane harvest gets underway. Cane trucks this year, however, may not be taking as much to the mill as they did in years past. That's all the result of a hot, dry summer. This week in Louisiana Agriculture's A.J. Sabine has our story of one sugarcane farmer in Point Capee Parish who's had to make more with less.
Under a watchful moon, high heat and blistering flames burn in the start of this year's sugar harvest on Kenny Sells Farm in Point Capee Parish. As Kenny works to fire up his cane field, it was hot weather during the growing season that has cost him tonnage at the mill.
The cane didn't have a chance to grow off early. Some of the later cane to be cut, it will probably be better because of late season growth due to late season rains. But this early crop, which was ripened 35, 40 days ago, essentially was stopped from growing once it was ripened.
Ironically, Kenny's farm was surrounded by water when the Morganza Spillway control structure was opened earlier this year. Fortunately, levees protected his farm, but nothing could protect his cane from the heat of the summer sun.
We had actually drought conditions this year. While the flooding was going on around us, we had such dry weather that was hurting our crop more than anything. People were pumping water onto crops inside this protection area, which was surrounded by record levels of water.
Despite the dry weather, Self says the sugar content of this cane is actually pretty good. In fact, he says it's about 20% above mill average.
However, Self's return on his sugarcane investment will likely be anything but average. Market demand for sugar has held up.
2011 is going to be much like 2010. We're going to see higher than normal prices again for this crop season. What those prices are going to be, we don't know. That's to be determined as the season goes on, as the sugar gets sold. But we are looking at high prices relative to where we've been for years.
2011 will likely keep farmers like Kenny Self motivated to come back next year. In Point Capee Parish, I'm A.J. Sabine for This Week in Louisiana Agriculture.
Louisiana sugar farmers planted nearly 408,000 acres of cane this year. Louisiana leads the nation in planted acres, followed by Florida, Texas, and Hawaii. Well, if you've driven west on Louisiana's interstates, you've no doubt seen hay transports carrying hay to our neighbors in Texas. Livestock producers there have all but run out of hay due to this year's extreme drought. Louisiana Commissioner of Agriculture and Forestry, Dr. Mike Strain, is urging Louisiana producers who have hay and want to sell that hay to Texas livestock producers to log on to the LSU Ag Center's Market Maker website. Strain said while Texas is in trouble, Louisiana has also had its share of problems related to this year's spring drought.
Our friends in Texas are having a desperate time in drought. The LSU Ag Centers just released their drought figures, and the losses from the drought on Louisiana producers was in excess of $395 million. And so we're also, overall, over 17,000 head of cattle were liquidated because there's nothing to feed them. Hay stocks are going to be low because we had an extended drought. We've gotten some rain, but we had to have that growth. You had to have a lot of that growth, through August and July and June, and that was the driest time. And we're just recently with the last group of tropical storms, gotten sufficient rainfall. They're cutting hay, and it looks pretty good. But I can tell you, around the 15th of February of 2012, hay is going to be short.
Strain said the Louisiana Department of Transportation and Development continues to allow large round hay bales to be transported 2 abreast. Now, if you have hay to sell, you can go to our Facebook page, This Week in Louisiana Agriculture, click Like Us, and tell us what you have. If you need hay, you can visit our page as well, and we'll do our best to try to get the buyers and the sellers connected. What could create nearly $2.5 billion in new ag exports and more than 22,000 U.S. jobs? Well, according to the American Farm Bureau Federation, that could come from the free trade agreements with Korea, Colombia, and Panama. President Barack Obama sent those agreements to Congress this week. Louisiana Farm Bureau Associate Commodity Director Kyle McCann says Louisiana rice growers would benefit most from free trade agreements with Colombia and Panama, and Louisiana ranchers would get a boost from the free trade agreement with Korea.
These free trade agreements have been stymied for some time in that they were originally signed by our country in 2006 and 2007. The additional 2 were signed. And so it's been held up in the political process, if you will, for some time.
McCann says before Congress can approve those free trade agreements, lawmakers must first approve the Trade Adjustment Assistance Act. That's a program to offset any negative impacts a free trade agreement could have on other non-ag related businesses. If you like to boil up a few pounds of fresh Louisiana white shrimp, well, you might have trouble finding them. In an article in the Baton Rouge Advocate, Louisiana Shrimp Association President Clint Guidry says this year's harvest is off by about 80%. Seafood wholesalers who would normally be filling trailer loads of shrimp right now say the shrimp just aren't there. Some shrimpers suspect the Deepwater Horizon oil spill disaster is to blame for the lack of shrimp in southeast Louisiana. But Olivia Watkins with the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries says all the data supporting that claim has not been collected yet.
We're engaged in the natural resource damage assessment process right now, which is really one of the crucial pieces of information that will allow us to tell whether or not there was an impact on any species, including white shrimp. And then once we have that information, we'll be able to tell, or hopefully we'll be able to tell what caused that impact. But that's a ways down the road.
Watkins says it could take as long as 10 years to make a determination after all the data has been collected. Shrimp season here in Louisiana began in late August and runs through late December. The death toll now from 20 states as a result of listeria-tainted cantaloupe now stands at 18. The most recent death was here last week in Baton Rouge when an elderly Baton Rouge woman ate cantaloupe allegedly from Jensen Farms in Holly, Colorado. Joining us now to talk more about this issue is Dr. Marlene Janes. She is a foodborne illness and food scientist at the LSU Ag Center, and she joins us this morning to talk about the listeria situation in cantaloupe. Dr. Janes, thanks for being here this morning.
Thank you.
Let's talk about this issue. Cantaloupe is a common fruit that has been shipped across the country, but it's been linked now to this Jensen Farms in Colorado. And while Louisiana was not on the recall list as a result of last week's death, it probably is going to be. What's the status of this situation right now?
Well, right now they are finding that several states were not on the recall list, and that the company that shipped them out, the wholesale dealer, did not keep good records to monitor where they were shipped out so we could recall them. And that way people would know if they should watch out for the illness.
You have studied foodborne illnesses throughout your career. Maybe folks are not familiar with listeria, but let's talk about how this disease is a fairly common thing in soil, but how does it work its way into the fruit?
Well, it's found in soil, and generally it can get into fruit through a cut or abrasion if they're improperly processed. So a lot of times they wash the fruit and then they package them. If the fruit comes in contact with dirt after being washed and it has an abrasion, or it could reside on the surface and people at home could cut it then it can get inside the flesh and cause people to become ill.
So this is essentially a cross-contamination process when the knife goes through the outside of the skin and then reaches the meat of the fruit. How do consumers, there are very few pristine pieces of fruit out there. How do you kind of know what to look for to know whether the cantaloupe you're about to eat is safe?
Well, I would just make sure that there's no cuts to the flesh. Another thing that consumers need to be concerned with is Listeria. The organism there's several different types of Listeria. The one that we're concerned with is Listeria monocytogenes. And the thing about this organism is it can grow at refrigerator temperatures. So a lot of times, I know I do this, I cut up my cantaloupe, I'll stick it in the refrigerator and leave it for a couple of days and eat on it over several days. Well, if it's on the surface, it gets in the flesh, you put it at the refrigerator, it's going to grow up to high enough numbers to make you sick. So maybe if you wash the surface thoroughly, you can use common vinegar on the surface of the cantaloupe because it kills Listeria and other bacteria. Then cut it and try to eat it quickly. Don't let it sit in the refrigerator for several days.
So in other words, more than just maybe taking a vegetable brush with just water from your tap, you're going to need something a little more powerful. You talked about vinegar. Are we making any strides in protecting consumers as far as keeping this from happening in the future?
I think we are. The FDA is putting in new guidelines. Just recently this year they started new guidelines. A lot of it's money. They need money to implement a lot of the guidelines. But I think we are. I think a lot nowadays we have one grower will ship all across the country year round. And I think that's why we have such big outbreaks because of that. If consumers are concerned, they should buy locally from local growers because there'd be less of a problem there.
All right, so the final word is if you have a cantaloupe that you're unsure about, first check it for cuts and abrasions, and if it looks to be okay from an external standpoint, a little vinegar and water always helps.
Oh yes, definitely.
All right, well, very good. Dr. Marlene Janes, she is an food-borne illness and food pathogen specialist with the LSU Ag Center. When we come back, October is Apple Month. Kristen Oakes with her Ag Minute on how an apple a day, well, you know the rest. Stay with us. Well, it's now time for this week's Ag Minute. Kristen Oakes now joins us, and Kristen, fall is officially here, and when we think about that, we think about the changing of the leaves, or maybe some pumpkins, but we're supposed to be thinking about apples?
Well, of course, because October is National Apple Month, and surprisingly enough, that old wives' tale about eating an apple a day to keep the doctor away actually could hold a bit of truth. The once forbidden fruit will actually keep you healthy and out of the doctor's office.
You know what they say, 3 each day, 7 days a week. An apple a day keeps the doctors away. Centuries ago, old wives created these clever sayings to make their children eat fruit. But the apple hasn't always had such a great rap. Throughout Greek mythology, the apple appeared as a symbol of desire and temptation. It wasn't until the Renaissance age that Europeans realized the apple wasn't evil after all. Ironically, the tasty fruit held some sort of magical healing powers. Today, people still believe in the healing powers of the ancient fruit. Cosmetic dentists at New York University say that apples are natural teeth cleaners and whitening tools. Dietitians say that adding apples to your daily diet may melt away unwanted pounds faster. So, an apple a day may not solve all your health problems, but research says it certainly won't hurt.
Now, the United States Apple Association created National Apple Month each October in an effort to increase industry sales, consumer awareness, and the usage of apples and apple products. To find out more about National Apple Month, visit our website at twilatv.org. Well, now it's time for this week's TWILA Trivia. In Turkey, Allie asked you, what is the national flower of Turkey? And the answer is the tulip. For this week's question, we've all heard of the legend of Johnny Appleseed, but what was his real name? Was it A, John Chapman, B, John Smith, or C, John Stevens? Log on to our website, twilatv.org, submit your answer, and we'll send you an awesome TWILA gift pack with some new surprises. Now, still to come on This Week in Louisiana Agriculture.
How much does trade in a country halfway around the world affect you at home? Coming up on The Bottom Line, we'll try and bridge that gap. Stay with us.
It's been a couple of weeks since our trip to Turkey. Since then, international trade has been in the news lately, making some headlines. Neil Melanson now joins us with this week's Bottom Line. And Neil, Turkey is the seventh largest economy, primarily because of agriculture. I know it's been a couple of weeks since we've been back. Have you had kind of some time to kind of reflect on what trade with Turkey and international trade could mean for Louisiana producers?
I have, Mike, and it's a hard bridge to gap between the activities in one part of the world and what goes on here at home. But what I've found is it's a lot more relevant than you might think. First, I have to say, with all of the issues relating to farming, from weather and crop genetics to state and national ag policy, it's no wonder farmers spend their time focused on what's on their plate. As consumers, we look at prices as a function of grocery stores and transportation and packaging fees, as well as the wages paid to farmers. These things, of course, play their role, but they're oftentimes strongly influenced by events overseas that we don't think about day to day. For instance, right now we're hearing a lot about the strength of China's economy and the weakness of Greece's. Right next door to Greece, though, is Turkey, which has an economy growing at 8.8%, the second largest in the world behind, you guessed it, China. Rachel Nelson, the ag attaché we talked with at the U.S. Embassy in Ankara, says the primary export of Turkey right now is ag products.
People need to be more aware of Turkey. That's one of the #1 things holding us back. People just don't think about Turkey and the opportunities here, and they're not aware of, the fact that it's, I think, the 7th largest export market for agriculture in the world.
How often do we think about Turkey as a big importer of our cotton? Granted, it's only one country, but think about what a difference in your budget a little money either way can make or break not only your personal finances, but that of a farmer's or a grocery store or a major corporation. When people think about the fact that Turkey is looking for high-quality cotton to make textiles for European fashion houses, that can spur more research for cotton, better infrastructure on farms, and export jobs for the shipping industry, all right here in Louisiana. The bottom line is that while we can survive without looking too much at foreign trade, we can also make some critical positive differences in our economies at home. At a time when money's tight, Mike, it pays to look for new opportunities.
Neil Melanson, always looking at the big picture. Great report. Thanks. And remember, you can listen to Neil's radio reports on the Louisiana Farm Bureau radio network. For a list of stations where you can tune in or listen online, just click on over to our website, twilatv.org, and look for the LFB radio link on the left side of the home page. That does it for this edition of This Week in Louisiana Agriculture. Next week, Avery Davidson heads to Plaquemines Parish, where citrus growers are again battling the citrus psyllid. We'll tell you how this pest could affect this fall's orange and satsuma crop. Until then, you can watch any of our stories online. Just visit our website, twilatv.org. For all of us here at This Week in Louisiana Agriculture, I'm Michael Dana. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Hope to see you again right here next week.